This is a video we recorded back in early April where myself and Corey highlight our biggest tips when it comes to trading within your Dynasty Fantasy Football startup, why we make trades, and ultimately where we see specific tier gaps when it comes to your startup draft. Like I mentioned, this was recorded back in early April as a site exclusive over on flockfantasy.com, along with a library of videos in the Dynasty 101 series that will be released on YouTube soon enough. But if you guys want access to all of these videos right now, our rankings, and other exclusive perks, head on over to flockfantasy.com and use promo code FSC for 30% off any package to get you fully prepared for your rookie drafts. If anything we say in this video seems a little bit outdated, remember this was recorded prior to the NFL draft, and these specific scenarios are more so a lesson rather than to be taken directly. So I hope you guys enjoy, and let's get right into it.
During your dynasty startups, you guys want to make trades. We want to make trades. We do it all the time. So what we're going to talk about in today's Dynasty 101, this is episode 4 for you guys watching this over on the site or watching this after the draft over on the YouTube channel. We're going to be talking about trading within the startup. Why do you want to make trades during the startup? Some of the principles of making good trades and making sure that you don't get hosed in some of these trades. And then also understanding the tier breaks within startup drafts that allow you to make trades that are advantageous for your team. And we're going to break down kind of everything under the sun relating to trading within the startup today. So Danny, before we get into it, what's up? How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, if you guys have been following our content, you'll know that we are big trade degens, and it starts from the startup. Being able to navigate some of these fields, we'll talk about some tiers, we'll talk about some potential moves you can make in said tiers to bolster the ending look of your startup team. When you go back and you see the team that you've drafted out of the startup and you see the assets that you collected, you want to have a smile on your face. And we're going to tell you today how that can be possible.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of new dynasty players are scared to make trades during the startup because they don't want to sacrifice value. They would rather just, take the players that are on the board there, and they don't want to look at their team and have the opposite reaction after the startup and be like, I traded away all of my good picks and I have no good players and I don't have any future capital. And that's a nightmare that we want to help you guys avoid. So before we get into it, as always, let's hit the intro. Okay, so the first question that we need to ask is, why do we want to make trades in the startup? We kind of answered it in the intro, but basically it can give you a huge leg up on your league mates if you understand how to do it properly. And that's easier said than done, but it's definitely something that we need to keep in mind. Just because trading within the startup can be advantageous, it can also be extremely destructive to your startup if you do it poorly and you don't understand properly some of the principles that we're going to break down in a second and some of the tier breaks that we're going to talk about later. And I'm sure I've experienced it. You've experienced it. Anybody's experienced a bad startup trade that leaves your team at a disadvantage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, we'll talk about a lot of the successes, but it's just as important to bring up some of the flaws. We've both gone through startups in the past. Well, we'll look at it and we'll be like, okay, what exactly can I do right now to fix a little bit of the stuff I've made? But that's the learning process, man. We've gotten to the point that we're at now from experience, from failures. So it's all about building up that scar tissue.
Yeah, exactly. So let's break down some of the principles of startup trades and successful startup trades and some of the things that you want to keep in mind during the startup itself. So in Superflex leagues, which is, a pretty clear preference of ours. If you guys play in one quarterback leagues, I'll get to that in a second. But in Superflex leagues, there is a clear denomination between the top 15, top 20 assets or so and the following players the rest of the draft. There is a clear top end talent, those elite quarterbacks, those elite top tier wide receivers, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts and a tight end premium. There's a top set of assets that are more valuable than the rest of the guys. And they're probably a tier, even potentially 2 tiers above the rest of the talent.
Yeah, exactly. And you guys would see that our top 16 list of Superflex players, like we're talking about cornerstone foundational type of assets, including, you guys will notice, some of the picks early on in the 2023 rookie draft. So you guys are wondering, oh, should I take, the 102, the 103 high in my startup? You guys can kind of see there through that sneak peek that we value those picks quite a lot.
Yeah, and rookie picks are an important thing to keep in mind during startups as well, because even though I would say they're worth the least amount of currency during the startup, other players recognize this as well. Because when you're in a startup draft, and again, we've all experienced this, when you haven't picked in a while, you start to get antsy, right? You want the players, you see the tier breaks happening, you want to go up and get a player. And people will often sacrifice rookie picks knowing that the second the startup is over, they become more valuable. And, 2 weeks in advance, 4 weeks in advance, 3 months in advance, rookie picks always gain value closer to the draft. And if you're doing a startup draft in January, a month later, the rookie pick that you gave away during the startup draft will be more valuable in February and more valuable in March, more valuable in April leading up to the actual rookie draft itself. So something to keep in mind during a startup is that rookie picks will always hold the least amount of value in the person's mind who's giving away said rookie pick. But if you're willing to collect the rookie picks, then you know that they're going to appreciate in value.
Absolutely. Again, when you're collecting rookie picks in the startup, like you kind of said, a lot of these people will just say, oh, I'm going to try to contend. This is going to be, the 109 to the 112. I'm not really worried about giving up a high pick. But we see it constantly that people will leverage these picks. It ends up being the 103, and that rookie first round pick that you got as icing on top of moving, let's say, down. I mean, we'll get into some of the examples, but moving down in your startup, so now that pick's worth more than the pick that the guy traded up for in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people will overrate what their pick's going to end up being. They assume it's the 112, they assume it's the 111, whatever the case is. I would say most of the time, if they're a contender, they're going to just assume it's 112, not even 109 to 112. So definitely something to keep in mind involved in startup trades. Another thing is don't undervalue second and third round rookie picks either, because people will give these guys away like nothing. They'll throw in a second round rookie pick to move up 2 spots. They'll throw in a second round rookie pick just to add a sweetener. People don't care about second and third round rookie picks. And we know that you can get good players. If that second or third round rookie pick ends up being at the early portion of the round, you can get potentially quarterback equity. You can get potentially great wide receivers, good running backs. Guys, this past year in a down class in 2022, you would have been able to get Dameon Pierce types, Tyler Algier types, some of the wide receivers that we saw come off the board. And, if you get a good draft class like we saw back in 2021 or whatever, you could get Elijah Moore types, potentially Devontae Smith types there in the early second round portion. So understanding that not just first round picks, but all rookie picks are extremely important to collect during the startup. If people are willing to give them away freely, is something that you want to keep in mind as a principle of, crafting startup trades.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree there. You hit the nail on the head. In terms of the type of players that we'll trade up for, and again, we'll talk about tier one in a second, but it's the quarterbacks. It's clearly the quarterbacks. The quarterbacks at the top are going to be the valuable pieces. The only time I'm willing to leverage a future rookie pick, 2024 first, 2025 first, is if I'm moving up to secure either one of the elite quarterbacks, or say I picked early in the draft and I can secure a second elite quarterback. If it costs my first at that point, I'm willing to leverage it. But if you're moving up for any type of flex player, positional player, I don't think it would be worth it in the startup.
Yeah, and there's very few cornerstone players, if you guys play in one quarterback leagues, that I'd be willing to move up for as well. And the other 2 principles that we'll go over real quick, and then we'll get into some of the tier breaks and how you can actually craft some startup trades. Understand your goals, right? You'll know by round 4, round 5, round 6 of your startup whether you're trying to build out a rebuilding type of shell of a team. If that's the case, get some production off of your team, punt for future draft capital, and continue to trade down. If you're building out a contending type of roster because everybody in your league is overvaluing rookie picks and overvaluing young players, and you see productive players start to slip in a sharp draft room, then at that point, go up and get those players. But keep in mind what the value that you're giving up is. And then also, when in doubt, if all of this sounded confusing, the easiest way to think about how to craft startup trades is just think of a bucket of players that's going to go in that range of the draft and craft a deal based on that. So if you're crafting a trade for the 102, which is Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and somebody's willing to give you, let's say, the 111 and the 202, they pick up 111 in the startup, they're going to give you both their first and their second round pick, and they want your 102, which is one of those elite quarterbacks, and your 302, which will be, again, thinking about it simplistically, a bucket of players around, potentially the 103 in rookie drafts, which would be like CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, those tier 2 wide receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, whoever. Maybe it's the second running back off the board, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, somebody like that. If you think of that package versus what they're giving you, which is potentially, a combination of Kyler Murray, CeeDee Lamb, Deshaun Watson, Dak Prescott, Kyle Pitts in a tight end premium, and then you can make your determination at that point. And I would say that's a relatively good example. I highly doubt you'd even get an offer like that for the 102, because typically when you say in the league chat looking to move off of 102, somebody offers you like the 111 and their 6th rounder for the 102 and your 8th rounder, which obviously is an auto decline. I'm just saying the easy way to think about trading is look at the buckets of players, use the ADP, use the type of room that you're in as reference, and craft trade offers based on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys, obviously, all of you on flockfantasy.com, I recently wrote an article about my biggest tips when it comes to Dynasty. And one of my biggest tips that I've found is that if you can assign players and you can assign opportunity costs to the actual picks when you're in your startup, it's going to help you so much. Because a lot of people will wonder, like you kind of said, on face value, you're thinking, oh, I'm moving down in the 1, but I'm moving up 2 rounds from the 8th to the 6th. We know that that's going to be a trash deal, but someone who's new to Dynasty that doesn't assign the player values, that doesn't assign the tier values, might just think, oh, I'm getting 2 free rounds later on, and I'm only moving down like 9 picks. Sign me up. When you actually evaluate these deals, every single move you make has to be with the thought of what exactly the opportunity cost at hand is here. If I'm trading out, what's the player I'm passing on? Is the value bundle that I'm getting in return worth said player's cost if we were to make that move post startup? Every single move you make, have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and we're going to get into those exact tier breaks right now so that you guys, so it's not just hypothetical. We know what the tier breaks are because we've done a number of startups. We've seen, ADP and stuff like that. So for us, we talked about that top 15 to 20 players being like gold. For me, there's actually 2 tiers within that top tier. There's the tier break 1A and 1B, and then we'll get into the other tier breaks. We're actually using ADP from Adiko FF on Twitter as a resource here, just to give you an idea of what like the potential draft board could look like. These aren't our personal rankings. You guys can find those on the site if you're watching that on here. And if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, flockfantasy.com, promo code FSE is how you can get access to our rankings. To me, there's 4 major tier breaks with that denomination of a 1A, 1B in that first tier. So the 1A tier, for me, the tier break happens at about 109 to 110, give or take, once the elite quarterbacks are off the board, like Mahomes, Allen, Herbert, Burrow, Hurts, Lawrence, Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, and also those top 2 wide receivers, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. And you could even make the argument that the quarterbacks themselves are just that tier. But for us, that's that top tier. Those guys are foundational cornerstone assets. And even though the players following them are still great assets to have, the difference between Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and those top guys, there is a distinction between them and Deshaun Watson, Kyler Murray, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, for sure. Like this is the main tier itself, about 10 names, like you kind of said. But I would even argue, like you mentioned, that there's like 3 sub tiers within this tier. The Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes tier, those are like the holy grail of fantasy. I'm gonna need your firstborn. I'm gonna need your Lamborghini. I'm gonna need your beachfront real estate. I'm gonna need every single asset that you own if you want one of those players on your team. If I own one of them. The other tier, like like the second tier, if you will, the Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert area, I would say, and then maybe if you want to throw in like Trevor Lawrence, that would be like the second tier in my opinion. And then the third tier, I think, would be the wide receivers. Actually, I would throw Lamar in the first tier, but the wide receivers and Justin Fields. So you're looking at it; they're all extremely valuable assets, but there's levels to it because I mean, we're talking Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen versus Justin Fields. As much as I love Justin Fields, I'd be willing to add on quite a bit to get either of those two.
Yeah, and how to handle this tier is pretty simple. If you get blessed with a high pick in your startup, like you guys do the roll to see who's picking high. If you get the 101, you're probably not going to get the value adequate enough to move down from that pick. Most likely, most managers are not going to give you that value. So the entire reason that 3rd round reversal exists in the first place is because people recognize that top 3 overall picks or whatever, those top quarterbacks are extremely valuable. So my advice would be to just pick those players. Just pick Mahomes, pick Josh Allen, and just wait until after the startup. See what you can get for them after the startup, and you're going to realize that people are not even capable of giving you the type of value that those top quarterbacks are going to demand on the trade market. When an opportunity approaches itself, and Danny's going to get into this in a second, to potentially move up to secure a second elite quarterback in that top 10 or in that top 15 or whatever, if one starts to slide, we're willing to do that. And that's pretty much the only area of the draft that we're going to be willing to trade up so aggressively.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, if I can have 2 top 7, top 8, top 10 picks, like we kind of make reference to, sign me up because I want to leave my startup in the first 2 or 3 rounds with at least two elite quarterbacks. You guys will see the example in the recent startup we done over on Flock Fantasy. No flocking. I got the 103, ended up picking Jalen Hurts there. I ended up seeing that Lamar Jackson was available at the 107. And yeah, I like Lamar Jackson. I like Justin Fields. I wanted either of those guys, but I aggressively made a move to go up and secure my second elite quarterback, second elite Konami quarterback. Sent him the 210, the 410, and my 2024 first. Again, like I made reference to, the only type of trade I'm willing to trade a future first would be to go up and get quarterback equity. So 210, 410, 2024 first, end up getting the 107 and the 606. So basically, if we're equating this, let's just say for ease sake, because I'm a contender, the 606 and the 2024 first pretty much cancel out. You're looking at the 210 and the 410 for the 107. Pretty hefty price, but when we're comparing, after the startup, what's going to be more valuable on the trade market, Lamar Jackson or Jalen Waddle and Treylon Burks? I'm telling you right now, if somebody has Lamar Jackson and you offer Jalen Waddle and Treylon Burks, it's going to be unlikely for them to accept that deal.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, 606 for a contender in the room that we were in was going to get you a pretty good production piece. You could potentially have had guys like Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams type slide to that point in the draft. And if not those guys, potentially an Austin Eckler high-end running back type of option like that, or even a productive aging quarterback. If you, in your case, you didn't need a second quarterback, but if you did need a second quarterback, those type of guys probably would have been on the board for you as well. So like I said, we are not likely to trade up very often, but when we are likely to trade up, it's going to be for a cornerstone quarterback. Now let's get into the 1B tier of this gold standard, top 15 to 20 assets in Superflex. And this happens once those top quarterbacks are gone. And you get into the second tier, third tier of quarterback equity, like Deshaun Watson, like Kyler Murray, like Dak Prescott, like the top rookies, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson. Also, Bijan Robinson, who's the first overall pick, most likely in Superflex leagues across the board. And then some of the other top wide receivers as well, CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, and potentially Kyle Pitts if you're in a tight end premium format. So once those players are off the board, that's when this 1B tier ends. And that typically happens at the end of the second round, give or take. You're looking at those tier 2 wide receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown, T. Higgins, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, those type of dudes. You're looking at RB 2 to 3 off the board, whether it's Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, whoever you like there, or you're potentially reaching on Anthony Richardson if you don't believe him, or even more so a Will Levis type of quarterback or a Daniel Jones type of quarterback, somebody like that. So for me, how I like to handle this area of the draft is I like to trade back up, like we already kind of talked about, before this area is gone. Now, I didn't go quite as aggressive as you, going up to 107 and grabbing Lamar Jackson. What I waited for was the tail end of the second quarterbacks to fall off the board. So Watson, Murray, Dak, those guys all started going off the board. What I ended up doing in the same exact league was trading up from my 211 to the 205 to secure Bryce Young, who is currently ranked as my 202 in startups, as my second anchor quarterback behind Josh Allen, who I got at the 102. Cost me a move down from rounds 3 to 4 and round 6. It was a 7-pick discrepancy in round 6, which stings a little bit. But again, I'm looking at this at the same perspective. If Bryce Young comes into the NFL and he's the second overall pick in the NFL draft or the first overall pick in the NFL draft, he's going to be very difficult to acquire on the trade market. And the reason I went after him was because I wanted to secure that second anchor quarterback. And all it really costed me was a tier down from I think Michael Pittman to DJ Moore, which isn't even really that big of a difference. And also a bit of a tier down in the third round, which kind of stung a little bit. Drake London ended up sliding to the guy. And I ended up having to settle, I think, for the rookie 107, which to me is Jordan Addison.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's the type of move I like doing. You guys would see here, Corey ended up going up for the 205, whereas in the Adeko ADP, some of the quarterbacks fall. And a lot of our rooms, because you guys know that we love quarterbacks and we hate running backs, I'll tell you right now, you're not going to see 5 running backs go in the first 2 rounds of an FSC league. However, you're going to probably see 10 to 15 quarterbacks go in the first 2 rounds. So getting ahead of the curve. Corey's still getting a guy like Bryce Young, who's got the ceiling to be a top 8, top 10 startup pick by this time next year, has that elite upside to pair with Josh Allen. So we both leave the first 2 rounds with 2 elite quarterbacks that we fully believe in and fully trust.
Yeah, so now we can get into tier break 2. And this is where it gets a little less complicated because our strategy is a little bit more across the board. In the late third, mid third area, maybe the early fourth, if your league's a little bit less competitive, quarterback is pretty much going to dry up, right? You're not going to see a lot of quarterbacks on the board still. Best available quarterbacks. I don't even think Tua types would even be on the board at that point in time, but they might be. Daniel Jones, Trey Lance, Will Levis. Those are the type of quarterbacks you're looking at the mid third, early fourth round type of area. Wide receivers are going to start to see a drop off as well because, Amon-Ra be off the board, Higgins, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Chris Olave types. You're looking at DK Metcalf, Devontae Smith, some of the rookie wide receivers potentially, which are still fine assets, but it's a bit of a drop off. Tight ends, Pitts is going to be gone. Andrews probably gone as well. So you're looking at, Kittle, Hawkinson, Kelsey types. Running backs, Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall, and Jonathan Taylor will all be gone probably at that point in the draft. So for me, the way I handle this area of the draft, once these tier drop offs start happening, is this is a good starting point to try and collect future capital. After we've already secured our anchor assets, for me and Danny, those were 2 anchor quarterbacks. I would aim for a spot in the next tier plus getting a future first. So the next tier that we're going to talk about is like from rounds like 4 to 7. If I can get a pick in that area for my 308 after, all those wide receivers, quarterbacks not looking too good, somebody wants to trade up for Tua or somebody wants to trade up for Lance or somebody like that, I'm going to go, I want your 511 and your 2024 first. It's a 2-round discount in the startup, which in their mind is a big time deal. I'm getting their 2024 first rounder as consequence for that. But what they don't understand to me is that this 308 area and the 511 is not that big of a drop off. And the fact that I can net a 2024 first as a result of that is a huge, huge advantage for me.
Well, yeah, if we're looking at the 511, like you still got plenty of wide receiver talent available. Like I think I got Jerry Jeudy in the 5th round. That would be a good pick. So theoretically, I mean, if you're trading down, let's just say you're moving off of, I don't know, Chris Olave, Stephon Diggs, T. Higgins, a receiver like that, and you're netting a 1st-round pick and still getting a guy like Jerry Jeudy, sign me up. That's great process. You're getting another high leverage type of pick added to a wide receiver where would it shock anyone this upcoming year if Jerry Jeudy was a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy? Because it sure as heck wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, exactly. And that area of wide receiver value is probably going to fluctuate year over year. Like just last year, we would have seen Deebo Samuel types going in that area of the draft. And now you can get him more so in that 5'11, like 6th round type of range as well. So in this round's 4 to 7 range, this is really the trade down zone for us because we know that our 4th round pick down to our 6th round pick, if we can coop a 2024 first or something like that, it's going to be very, very advantageous because as we kind of just broke down, the difference between, 505 Christian Watson and the difference between 702 Brandon Ayuk is not a huge difference. They're both young, fun wide receivers. They're going to give you wide receiver 2 type of production, but they're not, cornerstone assets moving from a 5th rounder to a 7th rounder. And so I already talked about the example that I had of trading down from like a Michael Pittman pick to a DJ Moore pick and then moving up in like the 9th round. I think Claire ended up taking like an older running back that was kind of depreciating because she was in like a contending window. I ended up getting like Kadarius Toney at the 9-11. So those type of trades are definitely possible to pull off in this area. And I recoup a 2nd rounder, which obviously serves to benefit my productive struggle type of build that I was going for. But you also have an example here from a different league that we can kind of outline to showcase the trade downs and trade ups in this scenario as well.
Absolutely. This is from actually our last league best ball that we started up last off season. You guys would have saw me break down this team on Dynasty Decisions. Very good spot. Just needs some running backs. Classic, 1-year punt type of team I would make. But in this trade, I realized that 2024 picks were at a little bit of a discount. So I tried to make a move and collect as many as possible. Ended up with about 5 or 6. This is the type of move I want to make in these rounds. Like you kind of said, rounds 5 to 7, there's not really much of a difference. Also gave him that slight upgrade going from the 11th or 13th to the 11th. But I cooped his 2024 1st-round pick. Even if that ends up late next year, you're talking worst case scenario, it ends up 109 to 112. We already inherently know that the 109 and the 112 this year in our startup that we just finished in no flocking already goes in like round 6 to 8 range anyway. So if you're contextualizing this, I'm basically getting a 7th, maybe another 7th and a 13th in exchange for the 5th and the 11th. This is how you get assets. This is how you get value in your startup by making savvy moves on the clock. Because like you kind of said, people are itching. People want to go up. People want to secure their player. They have that need. It's human psychology. When you see something that you want, you're going to do everything you can to make sure it's yours.
Yeah, and then you also didn't even mention the inherent upside of if Jeff here loses some value, has some injuries, then that pick is not 109 to 112. And instead of the 7th rounder floor range of outcomes that you just outlined, that's a 4th round startup pick in next year's startups. And then you really, really swung home and hit the home run on that deal. And sometimes the 2 deals we kind of outlined are more realistic deals. Like those are the types of deals you make in sharper draft rooms. But if you guys are playing with casuals, man, you're going to get some elite offers like this one that I pulled off in the Can't Wait startup. I traded down from my 4th round pick, which I believe was the 411. And this guy came up. He wanted Treylon Burks. He came up. He got Treylon Burks. And he gave me his 611 in return for that. Again, 2-round discount, right? It's a 2-round difference between those players. But at 611, Jameson Williams fell to me because we were in a startup that started mid-season. And because Jameson Williams was not on the field, he started to slide a little bit. And in return for his 2020 or his 2-round move up, I did not get the 101. It says I got the 101 in that trade. I got the 103, which is still a highly valuable asset. I got CJ Stroud and Jameson Williams for Treylon Burks, and I highly, highly doubt you could do that after the startup draft.
Dude, like that is actual insanity, but it's true. Shit happens like this. If you look back at some of your past startup leagues, see what happened in terms of some of the deals that go on, like you're looking at some absolutely crazy moves. Like even a few years ago when we did our FSC Listener League Dyno, I remember one of the moves, like I remember off my head, was I traded down from Amari Cooper and ended up getting Elijah Moore in a first round pick in 2022. That first round pick ended up being top 5, and I think I used it on either Traylon Burks or Drake London. So, like, you're talking about extreme levels of value you can get by being savvy on the clock.
Yeah, and we all know, like, even if those players don't end up working out, those rookie picks that you end up getting, just having that liquidity going forward is always going to be advantageous if you're in a rebuilding type of window. So that's like the tier 3. We kind of spend a lot of time on that because that's typically where most of the action happens for us. We're trading down, we're collecting future first. If we're a contender, we're trying to secure a bunch of picks in that range so we can fill up production for our team. Tier break number 4 is when people start to lose interest in the startup, I would say, because all the good players are gone. Everybody starts blending together. Older wide receivers are on the board. Mike Evans, Amari Cooper types, DeAndre Hopkins types at this point in ADP. RB2 types like Akers and Pacheco and guys like that. Older quarterbacks, Rodgers, Stafford, dudes like that, or guys lacking job security like Brock Purdy or Jordan Love or whatever the case is. You'd be very, very lucky to get a first round pick for a 1-for-1 swap. If you're on the board at 902 and somebody gives you their 2024 first for that, just literally take that and laugh all the way to the bank. But this is the part of the draft where I'm starting to collect twos because most people won't give up first anymore. If you're in a relatively sharp draft room, nobody's going to give you a first round pick for this pick straight up, let alone in like a move down scenario in a startup. But this is the point in the draft where I realized that, hey, this rounds 8 to 13 kind of blends together right now. So I'm going to move down from my 8th round pick, move down to a 10th round pick and collect somebody's second as a result of that. Because especially in 2024, when you guys are doing these startups, 2024 seconds should have a decent amount of value. At the very least, they're probably going to be 8th or 9th round startup picks this time next year. And if you get an early one, they could potentially be a little bit earlier than that. So the tier break at this point in the draft is, again, more so I'm looking to trade down. Even if I'm in a competitive window, honestly, I'm still probably looking to trade down in this area of the draft, recoup some value potentially if I gave away my future first. Maybe I can collect 3 2s or something like that to help mitigate some of the value that I lost earlier in the draft. So for me, this round's 8 to 13 range. Everybody starts blending together, and I'm way, way more likely to trade down, even more so than rounds 4 to 7, like we already talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you kind of mentioned it there too. Like if you're getting, let's just say you get a second round pick to move down from your 8th rounder to the 10th round. Like we could be talking about, say that guy moved up to go secure DeAndre Hopkins, to go secure, Rashad Bateman, to go secure Mike Williams, someone like that. I'm just referencing our No Flock and draft board right now for reference. You're basically still getting a solid player. Let's just say it's a Brandon Cooks type, maybe a Cortland Sutton type, but then you're getting a second round pick attached. And realistically, if your team's doing well, you have an extra second round pick to go buy a player. I'm sure that if the person who got, Mike Evans, the person who got, Joe Mixon, Wandale, Aaron Jones, a lot of these players, if they're not contending right away, there's probably not much you got to add on to that extra free second that you got in the startup regardless. So you're basically going to be having more buying power to buy production if you're in a contending window. So like you kind of said, we're framing this a lot like if you're retooling, like if you're when you're punting out of the startup, but it's still beneficial if you're a contender to make savvy moves and collect some future picks. I think in our No Flock, and actually I collected a couple extra 3rd round picks to recoup some of the value after I lost my 2024 first.
Yeah, exactly. Because like you just said, if you trade down from Mike Evans to Cortland Sutton and you get a second rounder attached to it, the second the season's approaching or mid-season when people are out of the competitive window, you could probably then again trade that second for Mike Evans that you traded down for and then end up with both players essentially on your roster once you're ready to make that competitive push if you're doing that right out of the startup. So yeah, trading within the startup, it's risky. Like we're not going to sugarcoat it. If you are not an experienced Dynasty player, I would suggest that you make minimal trades in the startup and maybe 1 or 2 that give you a little bit of a, dip your toe in the water and get some experience. But if you're an experienced Dynasty player, you can run circles around casual players. If you understand that these tier breaks that we outlined, the top 10 players, then players, 9 to 15 to 20, then that mid 3rd round to the 7th round, like those type of players are going to be relatively in the same tier, then rounds 8 to 13. If you understand where those tier breaks end up being, and it could differ room to room because certain players are going to fall, but for the most part, that's where the tier breaks are going to happen just based on our own experience. If you understand that, you can really, really benefit your team, whether you're trying to build a contender or whether you're punting it for the future. I would say, generally speaking, trading within the startup more so applies if you're trying to rebuild, but it also, like you said, can be beneficial if you're a contender. Secure those picks in the rounds 4 to 7 range, trade down in the rounds 8 to 13 range, and still secure some productive assets for you. So that is the end of the breakdown. Hopefully you guys took something away from this. If you did, be sure to check out what we got going on over on the site. Check out our rankings for exactly what players we'd be targeting in these areas of the drafts, of course. And if you guys are watching this after the fact on YouTube, we released this early to our Flock Fantasy subscribers over there, and check that out using promo code FSE. You'll get 30% off, get a 2-day free trial to see all the value on the site before you buy. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.